Hola a todos. Hoy descubrirás una técnica revolucionaria para aprender inglés que te permitirá avanzar rápidamente y con confianza. Este video es una puerta a un nuevo mundo de aprendizaje. Quédate hasta el final y si te gusta el contenido, suscríbete, da like y comparte tus pensamientos en los comentarios. Vamos a por ello. One day, in a green and sunny meadow, there lived a little hard-working ant and a lazy grasshopper. The ant, named Annie, was known for her dedication. From sunrise to sunset, Annie worked tirelessly. She was always carrying leaves, building her home, and making sure everything was perfect for the winter. The grasshopper, on the other hand, was called Gasper. Gasper preferred to jump around, enjoy the sun, and sing. His song echoed throughout the meadow, "Life is short, let's enjoy it." He never worried about tomorrow, he always lived in the present. One summer day, while Annie was carrying a large leaf, Gasper approached her with his usual lazy smile and said, "Annie, why are you worrying so much? Look at this beautiful day. Come and enjoy it with me, winter is still far away." Anita, sweating but determined, looked at him and replied, "Gasper, winter will come faster than you think. There won't always be sunshine and warmth. If you don't work now, when the cold comes, you'll regret it." Gasper just laughed. "Oh, Anita, always so serious. Don't worry so much, everything will be fine." Time passed. Summer turned to autumn, and autumn to winter. The meadow, once full of life, was covered in snow. The cold wind blew incessantly. Anita, safe and warm in her anthill, looked out her window as she ate the provisions she had accumulated. Gasper, on the other hand, was outside, shivering from the cold and with nothing to eat. His cheerful song had disappeared, replaced by a somber silence. Desperate, he approached Anita's anthill and knocked on the door. "Anita, please help me," Gasper pleaded. "You were right, I didn't think about winter, and now I have nothing." Anita looked at him with compassion. "Gasper, I warned you, but I also know how difficult it is to learn. I will give you shelter this time, but you must promise me that in the future you will work and not leave everything to chance." Gasper, with tears in his eyes, nodded vigorously. "I promise, Anita. I have learned my lesson." So, Gasper spent the winter in Anita's anthill, helping in any way he could. When spring came, he had changed. He was no longer the lazy grasshopper he had been before. He had learned to value work and foresight. But the story does not end here, because every year, when summer comes, Gasper remembers what he experienced and always tells other grasshoppers his story. So, if you ever hear a grasshopper sing in a meadow, it is likely that he is remembering the lesson he learned with Anita the ant. And so it continues, year after year, an endless story of work and shared lessons. Every time you remember the story of Anita and Gasper, you realize the importance of being prepared, of thinking about the future, and of not just getting carried away by the pleasure of the moment. You will never forget that, although it is beautiful to enjoy the present, it is just as important to prepare for the future. And in every grasshopper song, there will always be a little lesson hidden, waiting to be learned.
With each passing year, Gasper became a wiser and more generous grasshopper. Life in the meadow was not just about jumping and singing, but also a balance between enjoying the moment and preparing for what was to come. The other animals in the meadow began to notice the change in him. Gasper was no longer just the cheerful grasshopper, but also the one who gave good advice to those who were willing to listen. One summer, a young grasshopper named Lila came to the meadow. Lila was exactly like Gasper had been in his youth. She spent her days singing, enjoying the warmth of the sun, and thinking that the world would always be warm and full of food. One day, while Gasper was collecting seeds and herbs to store, Lila came over, curious. "Gasper," Lila said, "why do you bother working so hard? The sun is shining, food is plentiful, isn't it better to enjoy yourself and not worry?" Gasper smiled, remembering his own past. "Lila, I understand how you feel. I was just like you. But I learned that summer doesn't last forever. Winter will come, and when it does, you'll realize the importance of preparing." Lila laughed and, flapping her wings, said, "Oh, Gasper. You're like those old tales that older people tell to scare young people. Winter is still far away, and I want to live in the present." Gasper didn't insist, because he knew that some lessons are only learned through experience. He continued his work, remembering how Anita had patiently taught him. Meanwhile, Lila continued singing, carefree, day after day. Time passed, and the cool autumn wind began to blow across the meadow. The leaves fell, and the sun was no longer as warm. Gasper, with his provisions well stored, looked at Lila with some concern, but he knew that only she could decide when to learn her lesson. Finally, winter came. The once vibrant meadow was covered in white. Food was scarce, and the cold was intense. Lila, shivering from the cold and without the strength to sing, realized her mistake. With her last bit of energy, she went to find Gasper. She knocked softly on the door of his home. "Gasper, please let me in. I was wrong, I didn't think about what was coming." Gasper opened the door and, without hesitation, invited her in. "Lila, we all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them. You can stay with me this winter, but you must promise that when spring comes, you will be ready to work and prepare for the future." Lila nodded, grateful. Throughout the winter, Gasper taught her what Anita had taught him. He showed her how to store food, how to build a warm shelter, and how to find the balance between enjoying the present and thinking about the future. When spring returned, Lila was no longer the same carefree cicada. She had learned the importance of being prepared, and most importantly, she had found in Gasper a true friend and mentor. From then on, Lila, Gasper, and all the animals in the meadow lived in harmony, sharing their knowledge and helping each other. And so, year after year, the story of the ant, the grasshopper, and the cicada became an eternal lesson, passed down from generation to generation. Every time a new summer came to the meadow, there was always someone willing to listen and learn. The following spring brought with it a new cycle of life to the meadow. Flowers bloomed, Trees regained their leaves, and the air was filled with the sound of insects and birds. Lila, now a responsible and hard-working cicada, joined Gasper in his preparations for the coming winter. Together, they collected seeds, leaves, and everything else necessary to ensure their safety during the cold season. But that spring also brought a new character to the meadow, a young cricket named Nilo. Nilo was known for his endless energy and his ability to improvise songs on his violin. He quickly won the admiration of the other insects, who followed him wherever he went, enjoying his music and the joy he brought with it. One day, Nilo saw Gasper and Lila hard at work, carrying provisions from one place to another. With his violin in his hand, he approached curiously and said, "What are you doing? The sun is shining and music fills the air. It is not a time for work, but for celebration." Gasper, with his usual calm, smiled and replied, "Nilo, it is true that this is a beautiful time, but it will not last forever. We are preparing for winter, which will arrive before you know it." Nilo laughed. "Winter is so far away. There is plenty of time to work afterwards. Now it is time to enjoy and play my music." Lila, who remembered her own experience well, tried to talk to Nilo. "Listen, Nilo, I thought like you last year too. But when winter came, I realized how important it is to prepare. Don't leave everything to the last minute." But Nilo didn't listen. He walked away playing his violin, followed by a group of insects who didn't want to think about the future. Gasper and Lila shared a worried look, but they knew that some lessons are only learned through experience. Summer passed quickly, and soon the air grew colder. The days became shorter, and the nights became longer and darker. The insects that had followed Nilo began to feel the change. There were no longer so many flowers, no green leaves, and no comforting warmth from the sun. Winter was just around the corner, and many of them realized that they were not prepared. Nilo, seeing his group disperse in search of shelter, felt alone for the first time. Music was no longer enough to calm his fear of the onset of cold. Desperate, he looked for Gasper and Lila. "Please help me," begged Nilo, the violin hanging limply at his side. "I didn't think winter would come so soon. I'm not prepared." Gasper, with his wisdom, welcomed him into his home without hesitation. "Nilo, we will give you shelter, but you must understand that music and joy are important, but so is being ready for difficult times." Lila added, "There is time for everything, Nilo. Learning to balance work and enjoyment is the key to living in peace." Throughout the winter, Nilo lived with Gasper and Lila, learning to work with them, helping in any way he could. Grateful for their kindness, Nilo used his violin to brighten the long cold nights, creating songs that spoke of friendship, learning, and the importance of being prepared. When spring came again, Nilo was a different cricket. He still played his violin, but now he also spent time preparing for the future. Most importantly, he shared his story with others, making sure no one else made the same mistakes. The meadow, year after year, blossomed with new generations of insects, each learning from those who came before. Gasper, Lila, and Nilo became the wise men of the meadow, teaching all who would listen the importance of living in harmony, of enjoying the present, and of never forgetting that winter, though far away, always comes. And so the story continued, endlessly, uniting the creatures of the meadow in a life lesson that was passed down from generation to generation, ensuring that the wisdom of those who learned was never lost in the wind.
Y con eso terminamos. Si te gustó este vídeo, asegúrate de suscribirte al canal. Además, te invitamos a ver el siguiente vídeo que te dejamos por aquí, para seguir mejorando tu nivel de inglés a base de práctica y repetición. Nos vemos allí.